Why don't you say yes to the SNP next time? It's your future, and it's your country, you know. Good night.
Alex Salmond said yes to the SNP just weeks after arriving at St Andrews University in 1973. The history and economics undergraduate joined just as the party took off. In 1974, 11 nationalist MPs were returned to Westminster. Bliss was it in that dawn to be alive, and to be young was very heaven. And one future star of political journalism was watching throughout this period.
I recall Alex Salmond as a thin, rake-like figure. Then again, mind you, I was a thin, rake-like figure in those days as well, going around in a long coat and what I was later described as a Maoist cap, but it was a little cap perched upon his hair. And his abiding characteristic then and now was a combination of very, very serious politics and mischief-making. He cannot resist the temptation to make mischief with a political rival. While having that sense of mischief about politics and about life, he also took himself exceptionally seriously. Everything was planned and calculated in those days to do with student politics, now of course to do with the governance of Scotland.
We don't stand out at all, do we?
No, it's not.
I think student politicians are pretty weird. I mean, seriously, get a life. But I hope they could give me some insight into what the young Alex Salmond was like. So that one wasn't so good.
No.
How's it been today, generally?
It's been quite a good day, actually.
Yeah.
It's just the occasional one that you get that's not quite as good.
Well, this is such a traditional Labour. I mean, he was just saying his father's voted Labour, his father's voted Labour, so obviously it's going to be very hard to change your opinion.
Right, so we send 4 up this way and we'll go 4 down here. 4 this way, guys.
How strong does nationalism run amongst students today?
50-50, I'd say. Yeah, they're very strong unionists, so you're very strong nationalists at the moment, I'd say.
Yeah.
You actually want Scotland to become independent?
Yes, definitely, fully independent.
I believe by the time I'm 30 years old, I want full Scottish independence, you know.
We can leave you a leaflet, you can consider it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Take it easy.
How does the name of Alex Salmond go down on the doorstep?
Some people really like him, some people don't like him.
The old Marmite thing?
Yeah. Whenever people like him, I go, well, yeah, he's fantastic, he's a good leader. When people don't like him, I always try to say, well, it's not just about the individual character. So it doesn't have to be about him. If you don't like him, fair enough, you can still like the SNP.
The ability to ride 2 horses at once is a useful talent for a politician. Does Alex Salmond have it? His past suggests that he does. Alex Salmond had a reputation as a young radical, yet his employment was anything but. The young firebrand nationalist moonlighted at the heart of the Edinburgh establishment. For 7 years, he worked for the bank as an economist and oil expert. He must have inhaled the fumes of free market capitalism. Yet when the government saved the bank from 2 takeover bids, he applauded state intervention. Such paradoxes have haunted Salmond's career. Can a tormented left-wing activist and a sated capitalist apparatchik simultaneously inhabit one mind and body?
There has been that curious paradox, I think, since Salmond's period at the Royal Bank of Scotland between a socially democratic Salmond, a centre-left instinct, and the neoliberal side.
It's fair to say that throughout his career, Alex Salmond has been consistently oleaginous. That is, convinced that oil is the key to Scotland's economy and politics. The riches of the North Sea, lying in abundance off the Scottish coast, have kept a flare burning for 4 decades in Alex Salmond's mind. To an English politician such as I used to be, few phrases are as wearisome as the claim to Scotland's oil. The Scottish National Party won its seat in Westminster in 1967, about the time that North Sea oil was first discovered. And maybe that's not a coincidence, because the existence of those vast natural resources offshore Scotland helped many Scots to believe that Scotland could go it alone. And perhaps it also led to an increase in Scottish resentment, a feeling that the country would be able to live a life of luxury if it weren't for the beastly English. The question of whether it's Scotland's oil has long fueled the SNP's support. Even now, in 2011, it's a key part of their argument that Scotland has the ability to stand on its own 2 feet. Looking out at the scale of the industry and the wealth that it has brought, I can see that it's had a huge effect on Alex Salmond's vision for Scotland. I wanted to know more about the SNP leader's early years in the party. So I went to meet one of the independence movement's best-known figures. Margot MacDonald was a member of the 1979 group. That was a left-wing faction within the SNP. Membership of it got Alex Salmond suspended from the party for a period during the 1980s. Margot and her husband Jim Sillars were close to the SNP leader once upon a time. The pair of you will have known Alex Salmond since the early 1970s. From what you knew then, have you been surprised what a dominant figure he became in the party?
Well, I thought he would be a future leader because it's not so well known now, but Alec was one of the ones who were expelled in the early 80s. And one of the reasons I fought like mad, I didn't get expelled for some reason, one of the reasons I fought like mad to get him and Kenny McCaskill back in was that I saw Alec as a potential leader, even then.
And why did you see him as a potential leader?
He was very bright.
He had a toughness about him.
Well, it wasn't so much that, but he was different from the people who had led the Scottish National Party before. He was modern, and I thought that he could relate to modern Scotland far better than the others did, without being injurious to their reputations.
There had been a group of people in the SNP who had been working to establish that the natural position for the SNP in Scotland was left of centre. Jim's absolutely right, he was left of centre, and he was more clearly willing to identify himself as previous leaders of the SNP had been, who probably were left of centre themselves, but not as willing to announce it.
Alex Salmond's suspension would not be a life sentence. James Mitchell knew him throughout that period.
In truth, the leadership were very worried about this. They didn't want to cause the trouble that was bound to arise from the suspension, and they certainly didn't want to lose people like Alex Salmond with his talent, and so an agreement was reached, an accommodation, and so he was able to come back into the party.
And so the prodigal son was transformed into a favoured son.
Well, we're joined now by Alex Salmond in Aberdeen, the new SNP MP for Banff-and-Buchan. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Now, there's Alex Salmond, Margaret Ewing, Andrew Welsh. Would you like to be leader of the SNP?
I think that's a question for the future.
Once in Westminster, the new MP wasn't going to slouch complacently on the green leather benches. He was keen to make his mark in Westminster and with the voters back home. Perhaps he was looking to join the ranks of Scotland's great heroes. I'm rather fond of some of them myself. And as for Alex Salmond, a graduate in medieval history, what better inspiration could there be than Scotland's bravest heart. At the end of the 13th century, William Wallace fought for Scottish freedom, won a famous victory here at Stirling, and marched into England. During his time as a Member of Parliament at Westminster, Alex Salmond took the fight to London, where Wallace had been hung, drawn and quartered, and again fought for independence. I saw for myself a key Alex Salmond moment on Budget Day 1988. It was the period of high Thatcherism, and her Chancellor, Nigel Lawson, announced a breathtaking cut in income tax, eliminating the rates for the highest earners. Alex Salmond seized the moment, moved for the moral high ground, and launched his attack while the Chancellor spoke.
I propose to abolish all the higher rates of income tax above 40%.
Alex Salmond stood up, heckled Nigel Lawson, and brought the budget to a halt.
Deputy Speaker Harold Walker, Chairman of Ways and Means, has had to call for a vote on whether Mr. Alex Salmond should be expelled from the House of Commons.
This is a big moment in the Alex Salmond story. I was there, and it was a masterly piece of political theatre. Alex Salmond got named, that is to say he got suspended. It's like a red card in soccer. He had to leave the field. But more than that, all of us, we had to vote to suspend Alex Salmond. So the budget is disrupted for the 15 minutes that it takes to hold a vote. And I suppose by the end of the afternoon, from no one knowing who Alex Salmond was, everybody knew who he was.